I'm Em Sutter, better known as Pints and Panels.
And I am Don Tess, better known as the Don of Beer.
Welcome to episode 63 of the All About Beer podcast. Every 2 weeks, we talk with leading experts and take a deep dive into one topic in beer. This episode, we'll be talking all things Baltic Porter, a unique strong beer with a kind of confusing name. Visit us at allaboutbeer.com and follow us on social media at allaboutbeer. And if you're feeling generous, visit our support page, www.allaboutbeer.com/support to support this show and others. Don, how do you feel about Baltic Porters?
Well, I mean, I think it's fair to say that I like all beer, but I must confess that Baltic Porter's probably not my favorite style. But
Really?
one of the things I do love about this podcast, though, hosting this podcast with UM, is that like our guests always teach me something, and it makes me kind of, oh, I didn't know about that. And so I will rethink. I promise at the end of this episode, I will rethink my relationship with Baltic Porter.
Okay, good. I'm
How's that?
excited about
How
that.
about you?
That's
Do you
good.
love Baltic Porter?
I love Baltic Porters.
Okay.
So I'm really excited about I live in a town with a large Polish population, and so I've been exposed to mostly the macro Baltic Porters, but I'm a big fan. So
Yeah.
I'm excited to talk to two of our guests today about all things Baltic Porter. It's just such a good beer.
Warming winter kind of.
Delicious.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dark nights, Baltic Porter. Come on.
Yeah.
But first, if you would like to help support the All About Beer podcast, reach out to podcast@allaboutbeer.com. Speaking of supporting the show, here's a word from our sponsors.
Attention brewers. Registration is now open for the 2025 Best of Craft Beer Awards. This is a BJCP sanctioned competition judged by fellow brewers and industry leaders. It uses a unique set of style guidelines that champions harmonious and dynamic beers. Held in beautiful Central Oregon, it's the third largest professional brewing competition in North America and is an opportunity to have your hard work evaluated and rewarded. In addition to traditional and specialty beer styles, new this year is the hot water category. Register your beers through January 31, 2025 by visiting bestofcraftbeerawards.com/register. Don't delay. Learn more and get your beers signed up by visiting bestofcraftbeerawards.com/register.
This program is brought to you by Sierra Nevada Brewing Company, where trailblazing runs in the family. From crafting a movement with their iconic pale ale to taking the IPA haze craze nationwide with Hazy Little Thing, it's an adventurous spirit you can taste in every sip. Find your next favorite beer wherever fine beverages are sold. With new brews for every season, there's always something to discover. Sierra Nevada Brewing Company, still family-owned, operated, and argued over.
Gambrinus Malting was founded in British Columbia in 1992 with a vision to combine traditional European-influenced malting practices with North America's finest barley, wheat, and rye. Proud to be Canada's original small batch artisanal malt house, Gambrinus Malt has been part of the craft brewing movement since its inception. Over 30 years later, Gambrinus Malt remains a key ingredient in today's best craft ales, lagers, and spirits. Learn more about Gambrinus Malting by visiting gambrinusmalting.com or rarbsg.com.
Michael Kopic has 21 years of experience in the beer industry in its full scope, from consulting in the field of raw materials and brewing technologies to designing beer recipes and selecting the best pre-production variants for the market. He works in cooperation with contract breweries and restaurants as well. In addition to all of this, he also creates food pairings, is a beer mixology expert and educator, international beer judge, and lecturer of postgraduate brewing studies. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Welcome. Thank you for having me here.
Of course.
For such a wonderful topic.
It is a wonderful topic. So first of all, for people who are listening, who may not be familiar with Baltic Porter and its ties to Poland, what's the history of Baltic Porter in Poland? Do you believe it's specifically a Polish style, or does it come from somewhere else? What are your thoughts on the evolution of Baltic Porter?
I actually do believe that people in general, like throughout history, were having basically the same mindset. So For example, when we're checking what are the trends on craft beer right now, and the trends travel from example now states all over the world, so hazy IPAs, New England IPAs, yeah, your style, right, from New England, and such so are even like not so long-lasting styles as one trick pony, let's say brewed IPA. There was something like that, right, a couple of years ago. Uh, I think that people tended to do the same
Mhm.
1, 2, 3 centuries ago. And basically, Baltic Porter, well, then the center of, let's say, the brewing industry and knowledge and scholarship and everything was England. So Baltic Porter is strictly derived from the London Porter, which obviously was a totally different beer. It was much lower in gravity. It was stop fermenting. It used UK, well, England, then hops. But nonetheless, it was a dark beer. It was dark beer. It was a hefty beer in sense of sensory weight. And it actually sold pretty well in continental Europe. It was exported. Uh, Obviously, the history of well, all the world, but also mostly our part of the world, was kind of different throughout the times. So there were a couple of economic blockades. One done by Napoleon, the second one done by the Russian Empire, when the London Porter and then also Imperial Stout couldn't be delivered to continental Europe, to Poland, to other Baltic countries, to Russia, right? But there were breweries here. And if there was a demand for a specific product, a specific beverage, we have the equipment. We kind of know how it's, well, supposed to be made. Well, that's a great opportunity for a business and selling more beer, right? So,
Oh yes, I mean that's what breweries are for. They're
exactly,
businesses.
exactly. So we can't actually pinpoint the exact moment and the exact brewery that started using uh, bottom fermenting yeast for the Baltic Porters. Uh, Baltic Porters, well, as I said, strictly have their origin in London Porter slash mix with Imperial Stout. So much more, let's say, into the climate, weather, and let's say heftiness of what we want to drink here at the time, especially. Some of the brewers in the 19th century, when the bottom fermenting yeast from Bavaria basically spread uh, to all parts of the world, right, to the States even, mm, started using bottom fermenting yeast. But as we're talking about a beer that is very high in gravity, so we say that 18 to 22 plateau is a sweet spot for a Baltic Porter, but basically 2022 would be better if you're considering Baltic Porter. It's a conditioned beer, it's a matured beer, it has to be, well, Baltic Porter has to be lagered, but it has to mature for a long time.
How long
So-
does a Baltic Porter need to mature for, if I may ask?
Absolutely. That's a very good question, especially that we actually had the law before joining European Union. Yeah, and there was a law. There was something called Polish norm. And if the beer, it was for different kinds of products, also for beer. So if a beer was meeting the expectations of the Polish norm, for every 1 degree of gravity, well, in plateau, you had to mature the beer, lager it for 1 week. So, for example, if it would be a Baltic Porter that has 20 degrees plateau, it should be minimum 20 weeks of maturing in the tank, in the on the cold
Wow.
side.
That's
That's
interesting.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
To be honest, even the biggest corporations like Carlsberg, Heineken, they do store their beers, they mature their beers for at least 3 months.
Wow. That's amazing.
That's actually fun, and the
Yeah.
fact that we actually had a law for maturing the beer, because well, as all the brewers that are listening to us, you know that the beer changes, and if it's unpasteurized, if it's unfiltered, the yeast are still doing the work, even in 1 degree centigrade, right? They're still cleaning up from themselves, from the fermentation, from what they've done. And if we allow them to do it for longer time, prolonged time, the beer will be better.
Yeah, yeah. We should have laws here regarding that. Can I take you back a little bit? Back to basics. Can you just maybe describe a bit of difference between Baltic Porter and Russian Imperial Stout?
Oh yeah, absolutely. For me, Baltic Porter, the biggest difference is first the fermentation. So bottom fermenting yeast and top fermenting yeast. A Baltic Porter shouldn't have much of the esters that all the Imperial Stouts basically can have, especially the fruity ones. The fruitiness in Baltic Porters will be from maturation, from I don't like the word oxygenation, right? But basically that's it. All the flavors are working with each other and doing different stuff. So the fermentation wise, yeah, that's the main difference. But also, I would say that Imperial Stout is the bitterness, the IBU is way bigger. Baltic Porter, like the sweet spot would be probably around 20 to 30, maybe 35 IBU, depending on the gravity, just to counterweight the bold flavors of the malt, right? So to have it balanced, because the key in Baltic Porter is the balance. So fermentation, less bitter, and much less of black patent, roasted malts, or even roasted barley, which we do not basically use in Baltic Porters, the roasted barley.
Oh, interesting.
What other ingredients do you use to make like Baltic Porter? So malt, you've talked about the bottom fermenting yeast, I'm assuming Polish hops.
Yeah, Polish hops.
Feel wrong not to.
I'm wondering if
that's true.
would brewers even use like molasses or other adjuncts?
Yeah, we can do it. Last month in December we had the Konkurs Piw Rzemieślniczych, so the biggest craft beer competition in Poland, and I think the Baltic Porter, there were like 5 or 6 categories for Baltic Porter. So barrel age, different stuff added, and so on and so forth. So if you're doing the most strict to the basics Baltic Porter, you should use, and I know that homebrewers usually overuse different kinds of malts in one beer, but yeah, in this case, it's totally justified. You should do it. I just done my homework and checked my recipes for Baltic Porters from when I was brewing for a contract brewery Kingpin, and it had 9 different malts in it. If we're having the sweet spot 2022 plateau, I would say that the basic malt should not be Pilsner, but it should be Munich malt, Munich Light, for example. And then you can add Vienna, you can add other base malts that have more flavors. I always say that you should think of it as you have the equalizer for the music, right? So you have the low tones, you have the mid tones, and you have the high tones. And think of those as the malts that you use. So you have to have the base that would be more on the malty side. So Munich, for example. Then you have to have the crystal and caramel malts. I think that they aid in the proper maturation and maturing of the beer, and you have having those dried fruits, dried nuts, caramelized sugars, basically dark flavors that you have. So they do help those beers to age in this pleasant, fun way, not in soy sauce way. And then you have the dark malts. I would say I don't operate in SRM, but I would say that from 350, like the light coffee malts, EBC, to those slightly darker 900 EBC, just some to correct the balance, probably black malts, but very, just a tad, because Baltic Porter is more on the brown side than black side. when you have the colors. Obviously, when you have a half a liter of it, it looks black, but it is a brown beer. And so those would be like the basics for the malt bill. Not so much of the hops, just to counterbalance. You can sweet spot have the 30 IBU, low low alpha acid hops, noble hops, most of them. And basically that's all. You can also tweak the water for aiding the malt character. So using Epsom salt and, for example, calcium chloride would be okay for the water profile, and that would be like the most basic, the most classic Baltic porter. But then you can barrel age it. You can add dried fruits. For example, in Poland, it's very popular to add dried plum. It's called Suska Sechlońska. It's a plum from one specific region in southern Poland. It's slightly smoked in the flavor. Yeah, so for example, adding different smoked fruits to Baltic porters, when you incorporate them right into the profile, they especially mix well with those crystal and caramel malts. It's a great idea. Using different woods, for example, not to, let's say, barrel aged, but wood aged. Komes, Polish brewery, Marcin Ostajewski is the head brewer of both Fortuna and Grodzisk, the original Grodzisk brewery. They actually were the first one to use Amburana from I think Bolivia.
Yeah.
And it worked so well with those cinnamon, slightly lemongrass, bison grass notes. They worked so well with the profile of their. It's more on the drier side because you can have dry Baltic porters. For example, you liked Żywiec Baltic porter.
I do. I do like Żywiec. I wanted to talk about Żywiec actually.
That's actually a dry Baltic porter. Then you have something in the middle. So, for example, Komes would be kind of in the middle. So you'd have both the sweet notes, very, very, I wouldn't say cloying, but very round. You have all the maltiness, but also you have the roastiness, like black coffee, espresso, dark chocolate, like 95%. And then you have the sweet ones. So, for example, Okocim would be on the. Okocim is from Poland. It's Carlsberg. It's more on the sweeter side, the same as, for example, Kormoran. It's a regional brewery from Warmia. It's also on the sweeter side. So it's not that you have one particular base style, but it can be drier, it can be sweeter. Overall, what we seek as a brewer and what a brewer, home brewer, or a craft brewer should seek is the balance. It's a very balanced beer always.
I wanted to ask, so I've had some disagreements with my own illustrations about Baltic Porter. I like Żywiec because the town I live in Connecticut, has a very large Polish population. So we have lots of good Polish markets, and I can go buy Żywiec for like $3 a bottle or less. And it's my snow shoveling beer, and it's one of my favorites. I love there's a licorice note, and I post that, and then all these Polish brewers are like, no licorice, and I'm like, but I get licorice in Żywiec. So like, where do you stand on? Am I like insulting Polish brewers by saying there's licorice, like the licorice flavor?
No. Actually, I was one of the guys. I think I was the first one that wrote you that no licorice. Well, because licorice can be, and that's another part of my homework, because I actually checked both the Brewers Association guidelines for Baltic Porter from last year and the new ones for the World Beer Cup. And actually, you can check it for yourself. But the Brewers Association 2024 Baltic style porter, distinctive malt aromas and flavors of caramelized sugars, dark sugars, and licorice are present. Licorice can be, but 2025 distinctive malt flavor aromas and flavors of caramelized sugars, dark sugars, and dried fruits are present. No licorice.
Oh, M,
Oh my
they canceled your
gosh.
licorice.
They canceled my
They did.
I think it's a lovely flavor in Baltic
Uh, it, it,
Porters, but
I,
and I'm that's the thing about beer that's so great is I'm learning too that
Uh,
so why shouldn't licorice be present?
no. It's not that it shouldn't be. It can be,
Hmm.
but guidelines it was that, especially I remember from last year when I was judging the World Beer Cup and I was judging 2 rounds of Baltic Porter, and in the guidelines it was that the liquors must be present, right?
Mm.
Because there's a lot of great Baltic porters in the States also
Mhm.
that do not have any notes of licorice. It's I would say that the licorice is derived from more darker malts during the process of aging of the beer. So it totally depends because I even had Żywiec 2 days ago, 3 days ago, something like that. And this one was in a can, not in a bottle. And
Oh,
basically,
I love Żywiec in a
basically,
can.
yeah. And basically, there was no licorice in this one present. So it's not
Yeah.
a flavor that is popular in Poland, right?
Okay.
Because we do not use licorice for basically anything. But
Yeah.
for example, probably in Scandinavia, I think that they may or even may brew Baltic
Hmm.
porters with licorice because why not?
Yeah.
It
oh,
can work.
Sure. That would be really good. It must be I'm thinking now because I mean the Żywiec that I get has to go on a boat for a really long
Travel,
time,
yeah.
and then it sits in it's called the roly poly grocery store, which is phenomenal. It's like going to Eastern Europe. It's the Polish butter, the Polish like you want it, the Polish newspaper. They got it. They got everything, but it sits in a very bright cooler for who
Oh
knows
yeah.
how long. And so it must be an aging process thing. So,
Yeah, it totally depends on the molds and probably other different ingredients that are because, for example, hops. You have 10. No, well, from the chromatography some years ago, I guess it was that one variety of hops can have even as much as 1,000 different chemical compounds. So basically, it depends how it's gonna age.
yeah, I like that. What is one thing you wish people knew and understood and appreciated about Baltic Porter?
That it always has to be a very well balanced beer. I would say round. I would say all the flavors are in different layers, and they go one by one on your palate, and the beer just unveils itself like when you're drinking it, and you can just like with every sip you can find something new from both the ingredients that were used, from the aging, from the fermentation, and that it's a very complex, very layered beer that probably if you tried one and you didn't like it, because for example it was too dry or too sweet, then
Or
try
too much
from other
licorice?
brewer or too much licorice, exactly, or
Or
too
not enough
little
licorice?
or not enough, exactly. So try another one, and there's bound to be a Baltic porter that you're gonna like.
Yeah, I like that.
Michael, thank you so much for all your knowledge on this topic. I really appreciate you taking your time. If people want to reach out to you, do you have a social media handle or an email or a website you'd like to share?
Absolutely. I even have a link tree, but so I don't know
Perfect.
if I should send it to you via email or just send, because it's Polish name, Piwny Garaż, so probably, well,
We'll
We'll
link
put
it.
it in the show notes.
We'll
Yeah.
put it in the show notes. We'll put it in the show notes. So if people want to reach out to Michael, yes, check out the allaboutbeer.com.
And for once, people will actually have to read the show notes.
Yes. Michael, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And now I want, even though we're recording this early in the morning, I want a Baltic Porter, but I'm
I
not going
do
to do that.
too.
I need to
Yeah.
work.
I want
oh,
three
Thank you.
thank
Baltic
you,
Porters because I want to taste the differences.
Yeah.
thank you
Thank you
so
so.
much for having me, and I'm gonna remember to bring some Baltic porters to Indianapolis.
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Thank you,
Great.
sir.
Thank you so much. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers, take care. Thank you so much.
And we'll be right back with Jenny Pfefflin, excuse me, of Dovetail Brewing right after this message.
Need ingredients and supplies that deliver consistent, high-quality beer? Roar BSG has you covered. From hops to malt to yeast to unbeatable customer service, they are dedicated to your success. Roar BSG, ingredients for greatness.
This program is brought to you by Sierra Nevada Brewing Company, where trailblazing runs in the family. From crafting a movement with their iconic pale ale to taking the IPA haze craze nationwide with Hazy Little Thing, it's an adventurous spirit you can taste in every sip. Find your next favorite beer wherever fine beverages are sold. With new brews for every season, there's always something to discover. Sierra Nevada Brewing Company, still family owned, operated, and argued over.
Attention brewers, registration is now open for the 2025 Best of Craft Beer Awards. This is a BJCP sanctioned competition judged by fellow brewers and industry leaders. It uses a unique set of style guidelines that champions harmonious and dynamic beers. Held in beautiful Central Oregon, it's the third largest professional brewing competition in North America and is an opportunity to have your hard work evaluated and rewarded. In addition to traditional and specialty beer styles, new this year is the hop water category. Register your beers through January 31, 2025 by visiting bestofcraftbeerawards.com/register. Don't delay. Learn more and get your beers signed up by visiting bestofcraftbeerawards.com/register.
Jenny Pfafflin is a brewer and marketing and creative manager at Dovetail Brewery, a brewery in Chicago that specializes in continental European styles and traditional methods. She is also an advanced Cicerone, which dovetails her interests in traditions of both brewing and beer service. She is also a certified sake professional and Makloi homebrewer. Welcome to the show, Jenny.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So you're the person that came up with Dovetail's Baltic Porter recipe. Is this true?
This is very true.
Thank you, by
That's
the way.
wonderful. Yes, thank you for that, because I've had it. It's very good. What went into this recipe formulation?
Are we talking like the actual ingredients or how we got there?
Actually, I guess both, to be honest.
Yeah, how do you start? Like, okay, I want to make a Baltic Porter, and then how do you end up bringing it out?
Right. Yeah. So, I guess I'll start with why a Baltic Porter. If you're not familiar with Dovetail, we do specialize in continental European style beers. So there is a certain lane that we do have to stay in when we are brewing beers here at Dovetail. So nothing from the islands, we say. But I am a big English style beer fan. I do enjoy porters and stouts, and I also had a curiosity for a long time about the brewing traditions of the Nordic countries and the Baltic countries as well, because I knew there was a lot of, farmhouse style beers that were still being produced in those areas, like, what Lars blog has uncovered for the masses over the past few years. You've got Lithuanian style farmhouse beers in the Baltic countries. As an example, you have the Norwegian styles with the introduction of, commercially here in the States with Kvike yeast. There's a little island off of Sweden called Gotland, where they have a indigenous beer called Gotlandsdrika. So I was just really kind of, I like to get into rabbit holes, and about 10 years ago, that was my particular rabbit hole, and I was just interested in exploring the beer styles of those areas. So of course, there's these farmhouse traditions, but there was industrialization, like anything in beer in these parts of the world as well. And at the time in the late, I guess it would be 19th century, early 20th century, what was being industrialized were these lager breweries. So lagers were, becoming introduced to these areas as well. And I'm sure it's already been spoken about maybe by, yourselves or the other guests about like the history of Baltic Porter and how it came to be. So I won't rehash that, but because also it might not be very accurate. I'm not a historian. I'm just a beer nerd. But anyway, I love, dark lagers as well. So the first recipe that I wrote for Dovetail was the Czech dark lager recipe. So I wanted to challenge myself again, like dark lagers are not necessarily one note, as we know, right? As beer drinkers, as we know, there's lots of nuances involved to the dark lagers. So yeah, I just started out. I was inspired as well. I am from Chicago, and it used to be Chicago has the biggest concentration of Polish people in the States. So I spent a fair amount of time in my youth going to the Polish delis. And when I got old enough, eventually finding my way to the small beer aisles they would have in these delis, and picking up the Okochum and the Żywiec version of their dark lagers, their porters, Baltic porters, I guess you would call them, as well. So that was kind of an inspiration as well, is the west side of Chicago in the Polish delis. However, what Dovetail's version is not necessarily a Polish version. A lot of the Polish styles, I think, especially Okochum, I think is like 9.5% ABV. So it's like this really big beer. I went more on the Swedish side, inspired by Carnegie Stark Porter, which I also believe is like the first trademark in Sweden as well.
Oh.
Just a little. Don't quote me. I'm pretty sure though.
We'll look it up.
Pretty
We'll look
sure.
it up.
Yeah, we'll just keep repeating it,
Let me
and then
know.
it'll be
Yeah, it'll be
Yeah.
true.
That's your beer trivia for today.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
like I think there's also like, as we were mentioning in like the pre-interview, like I think of Baltic Porter as kind of like it is farmhouse in the spirit that each house has its own kind of interpretation of this style. So I think, there's this kind of notion that, Baltic porters have to be these gigantic, full of, and they are bigger beers, but they don't necessarily have to be bigger beers. So Carnegie only clocks in at like 5.5%, I believe. So for the Dovetail one, we ended up at like a 16 Plato beer, which is about 6.5% ABV. And when I was writing the recipe, I thought about all the things that I really love about Baltic porters. You have that little like espresso chocolate character to it. You have a little biscuit and caramel. Of course, you have like, I think what is kind of the, maybe like the trademark of at least malt flavors in Baltic Porter is that little bit of fruitiness, that little caramel, that little raisin, that little dark fruit that comes out, and it can come out in different ways. And for us, I put in Special B, which is a specialty malt that kind of lends those kind of like raisiny characters to the beer. So what I wanted was something that was cozy, maybe cozy lager. And that's what I think of when I think about the Baltic Porter. So it is, for us at Dovetail, it is higher in ABV. Most of our beers are like 5-ish%. So for us, a 6.5% beer is a big beer around here. So a little alcohol warming, but you have those like really smooth chocolate flavors with just a little bit of raisin and a little bit of caramel and maybe some biscuit as well. And that was kind of like how I came to a Dovetail version, our interpretation of a Baltic Porter, which was really kind of inspirations from both sides of the Baltic Sea, from Poland to Sweden.
So I like that you use the word interpretation. Do you think American Baltic Porter is different from Polish styles? And like for example, American barley wine is a hoppier version of British barley wine. Do you think American Baltic Porters are different from Baltic Porters?
Well, again, like what's, that's the question. What is a Baltic Porter?
Yeah.
I think like everybody has an interpretation. But if we're talking about the Polish interpretation of a Baltic Porter, I would say American Baltic Porters are probably closer to that, because I just think, the stamp that American brewers have given on these other these old world beer styles is very American itself. There's a lot of bravado usually put into them. So I think like the American interpretation of a Baltic Porter is going to veer into the higher ABV side. Maybe a little bit more chocolate, maybe a little bit more, just a little bit more hoppiness or bitterness, but not veering too much into that, because then then you just have maybe an American Imperial Porter.
Stout.
Yeah, or an
I
imperial
don't know.
stout.
I don't know.
Yeah.
You have a
Yeah.
lagered
But
imperial
if you-
stout.
Right, exactly. But if you're using lager yeast, or you're using an ale yeast, like
Mhm.
lagering it, and that's what I'm saying. Like there was so many, like I think it's Simberkoff, the Finnish Baltic Porter, which I think is still an ale yeast. I think it's still, and that's how I'm pretty sure. Again, there's not too much. When I was doing my research, there's no secrets in the brew house when it comes to Dovetail, but there were lots more secrets I found when trying to do research into Baltic Porters, at least in my native English language. So and that has to do with, I think, a lot of like the economies of scale too, right? So when they were like building lager breweries in the Nordic or Baltic states, it made more sense to go with one yeast strain. Like, why have two yeast strains in your brewery? So they picked lager yeast because the pale lager at the time was running away as the most popular beer style in the world. So I think that's how it grew from this like interpretation of the British porter into this lagered, this dark lager. But then you do have places like Simberkoff that still use an ale yeast to produce their Baltic Porter. Carnegie Stark was produced with an ale yeast. I think into like the 1990s, maybe even a little later, before they switched over to lager yeast. And I don't know if they're owned by Carlsberg now, so I don't know if that had to do with, probably, I don't know.
Does
So
Carlsberg use lager? I'm just kidding.
yeah.
What?
Who was that Christian guy anyway? Yeah, so I feel like I'm rambling. What?
No,
where
no. Can I
But
ask
yeah,
a follow-up question?
going
You finish.
we were going back to America. So I think like as far as like the American interpretation of Baltic Porters, I think it tends to be more on that Polish side, which the
Right.
Polish ones tend to be just bigger and bolder and have a little bit more bravado, like Americans tend to think they are.
Yeah. You mentioned how, it kind of makes sense if they were brewing lagers that they would, make their Baltic Porter with a lager strain. At Dovetail, do you use the same, Dovetail, obviously you make a lot of lagers. Do you use the same strain, or are you using a more alcohol tolerant strain, or how do
No,
you-
we do. We just use our house strain, which
interesting.
is what
Hmm.
it's the Weinstefan BSI strain. So
Okay.
yeah, we I think we only have like two or three strain. Like we have our lager yeast, we have our Hefeweizen yeast, we have our Kolsch yeast, and then sometimes when we play around with our Belgian side, we'll have a Belgian yeast strain in house. But for the most part, we don't get too complicated.
Right.
So before we went on the air, we were talking about your cool ship, and you said that the Baltic Porter goes through your cool ship. Why do you do that? And does that have any special benefit to Baltic Porter?
Well, the reason we do it is because Hagen and Bill, the two brewer founders of Dovetail, were very much inspired by the Franconian breweries that they visited when they were studying in beer school at Duman's Academy. And in the Franconian and Czech tradition, you see less and less of it now because technology has advanced since then. But cool ships were a thing that you would see ordinarily in lager breweries, and literally what it means. It's like it was a way to cool down the wort. The reason why Dovetail utilizes it, I like to call it a dual ship, because because we are passing all of our quote unquote clean beers, our lagers, our Hefeweizen, etc. Kolsch all goes for the cool ship. But as I mentioned before, we are a continental European style brewery. So we also produce spontaneously fermented beers. And I think, most people associate cool ships with the lambic style when you hear of a cool ship or seen a cool ship. So we actually do not produce our spontaneously fermented beers too often. It's maybe once a season that we're using the cool ship for that. So the reason why we use the cool ship for the lagers and our German ales and whatnot, the non-spontaneously fermented beers, is a few reasons. One is tradition. Two is it's another way to for clarity in the wort. We separate the hot shrub when the wort comes into the cool ship. Two, it blows off, further blows off DMS precursor. So it gives it more time after your vigorous boil. And DMS is that kind of that flavor that you get that's kind of similar to cream corn. And it is malt produced. So it can be blown off by a vigorous boil, or as we call it our cool ship rest, when the wort is sitting in the cool ship. It also allows us to do additional hot side hopping. So we did not do this for the Baltic Porter, but we do it for like our Rauch beer, for example. We do a series of Hopfen lagers. So it's kind of our, we don't have a whirlpool. So this is our version of a whirlpool, and that's our version of whirlpool hopping. And then I have not been able to experience this myself, but maybe one day. But Hagen and Bill swear by a certain, I guess you would call it a je ne sais quoi of a cool ship lager. That there's this kind of harmony, that all the parts and pieces of the beer, of the wort, come into place during that cool ship rest as well. So they tell me that, when they were in Franconia and going to these smaller breweries, they would be able to tell, again, this is lore now, that they would be able to tell whether or not a lager was cool shipped or not by tasting it.
Oh,
So.
that sounds like a fun experiment.
Awesome. I think they should I need them to lead like a little brew tour through Franconia and test this theory. I wanna test them on this. But
Yeah.
I like the idea that magic, there's some sort of magic involved as well. So that's another reason why we use the cool ship for the lagers in
Cool.
our other ales. Yep.
Oh, I said cool, and I didn't even mean that pun, but cool.
So I guess maybe what the cool ship brings to our Baltic Porter is maybe that kind of harmony or balance in the malt character that they say it brings.
A Franconian flair to your Baltic Porter, maybe.
Yes.
how is the Baltic Porter received by customers? Dovetail has a reputation for your clean, you know, harmonious continental lager styles, and then here comes this high ABV dark lager. Do people go like, what's this? Or do people like it?
Or do they go, I didn't know you made ales. This is a
Yeah,
porter. And you
exactly.
have to go,
Yeah.
no, 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 no.
I think a lot. I mean, I think for the most part, like 90% of beer drinkers aren't even like don't even pay attention to processes or
What?
ingredients.
I'm just kidding.
I don't know. Like I don't think so. I think like the whole like over education of there's a certain audience that's like, "Ooh, that's interesting." I think most people are like, "Whatever, Baltic Porter."
Uh,
They're not giving two things. They're not like, "What is Dovetail doing?" But I think one, um, it was our way of offering, when people come in and they're like, "What do you have on that's dark?" That's what customers are asking. They're
yeah.
like, "What's your darkest beer?" So that's a reason why it's a nice it fits nicely into our menu, especially this time of year. Like I said, it's a little higher ABV for us, so it's not like it has a little bit of alcohol warmth to it. But also that's the other reason too. People are like, well, what's your honest ABV beer? Well, here you go. But I think for the most part, it just people look when people drink with their eyes, they might see pale lagers, and of course, like pale lagers rule the world, right? And for the most part, the pale lagers that a lot of people have encountered are these, the mass market, industrial lagers that, for lack of a better word, like pale in their kind of their malt flavor. So when they see something that's darker, I think they kind of think in their mind it's going to be more flavorful, and usually they're, you know, maybe they're right. Usually they're right. Also, I think there's this, looking at that color, and it's our darkest beer by far. Guinness. Guinness is another one of the most beloved beers in the world, and people know, when they order a Guinness, what they're getting. And it's as close as we're going to get to a Guinness here at Dovetail. So I think it scratches that itch. So I
Hmm.
think when people just like certain beer drinkers do gravitate towards the quote unquote, what's your darkest beer
Or your highest ABV. Yeah.
or your highest
It hits
ABV
both.
beer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's
And
Chicago winter. I feel like Baltic Porter is, I feel like it's almost like a must-have.
Yeah.
and
It's
I
dark
and I
and
And
love
cold.
that
again,
I love that customers probably come in and they order the Baltic Porter and they take their first sip and they go, "Oh my God, I can really taste the cool ship."
let's hope.
Yeah.
Jenny, thank you so much for your time today. If people want to learn more about Dovetail or the Baltic Porter or what you're up to, do you have social media handles for yourself and or the brewery?
I've kind of yanked myself out of personally of social media, but you can
Okay,
find Dovetail
wonderful.
on most platforms at Dovetail Brewery. At,
Cool. Great. Thank you so much for teaching us all about Baltic Porters and
Yeah,
the
this
cool
was
ship.
awesome.
And yeah, it was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
yeah, yeah,
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.
sure.
So, Don, how do you feel about Baltic Porter now?
Uh, as I predicted, our guests gave me some things to think about. I don't have a Baltic Porter in my fridge right now, but I am going to seek a couple out, and I want to think about licorice or not licorice. I want to think
Yes.
about
I learned no
lagering
licorice,
time.
no licorice. When
Well,
when we were talking to Jenny and she was reading, like she was talking about all the different flavors she looks for, and I was like,
yeah.
man, if she says licorice,
You're gonna lose it.
I'm gonna lose it.
Yeah, no, I do agree. Like dark fruits and all that. That is something that I do appreciate. I need to think about my Baltic Porter again when I next have one. So for my local brewers where I live, please make a Baltic Porter so that I can enjoy it.
Yes. Make Baltic Porters just in general. If you're not in
Yeah,
John's
sure.
area,
Yeah,
just
you
make
don't have to make
more
beer just
Baltic
for
Porters,
me.
please. So anyway, visit allaboutbeer.com and please follow us on social media at allaboutbeer and visit www.allaboutbeer.com/support to support this show and others. If you have questions for the experts, email podcast@allaboutbeer.com. That's also the email for feedback, suggestions, or to inquire about supporting this show through advertising. Don, how can people reach out to you?
Oh, I am at the Dawn of Beer on X, Threads, and Instagram, Blue Sky as well. And people can drop me an email, dawn@thedawnofbeer.com. How about you, Em?
I am at Pints and Panels on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky, and my website is www.pintsandpanels.com. If you enjoy this show, please share it with your friends, post about us on social media, and like and subscribe to the show. Please help us spread the word of good beer. And here's a final word from our sponsor.
For over 175 years, Rar Malting Company has been a trusted partner to breweries, distilleries, and other beverage makers. Family owned since its founding in 1847, Rar's age-old reputation for excellent quality and customer service remains evident in fine malts such as Rar Two-Row, Rar North Star Pils, and Rar Dextrin Malt. For consistent color, flavor, and performance, count on the malt of reputation. Count on Rar Malt. Learn more at rarbsg.com.
This program is brought to you by Sierra Nevada Brewing Company, where trailblazing runs in the family. From crafting a movement with their iconic pale ale to taking the IPA haze craze nationwide with Hazy Little Thing, it's an adventurous spirit you can taste in every sip. Find your next favorite beer wherever fine beverages are sold. With new brews for every season, there's always something to discover. Sierra Nevada Brewing Company, still family-owned, operated, and argued over.
Attention brewers, registration is now open for the 2025 Best of Craft Beer Awards. This is a BJCP sanctioned competition judged by fellow brewers and industry leaders. It uses a unique set of style guidelines that champions harmonious and dynamic beers. Held in beautiful Central Oregon, it's the third largest professional brewing competition in North America and is an opportunity to have your hard work evaluated and rewarded. In addition to traditional and specialty beer styles, new this year is the hop water category. Register your beers through January 31, 2025 by visiting bestofcraftbeerawards.com/register. Don't delay. Learn more and get your beers signed up by visiting bestofcraftbeerawards.com/register.
This show is produced by All About Beer. Visit allaboutbeer.com for articles, notes on this show and others, and to connect via the newsletter and social media. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
Licorice.
Licorice.
I don't know.